Today, I want to start the podcast with a quick story about staying curious. Several months ago, I went to see an acquaintance, now friend Amy, about some skincare. It's something I don't know a lot about, and I was having adult acne, and I wanted to talk to her about a chemical peel. We talked about that, and then she asked me about my skincare routine. I don't know a lot about skincare, and I've done the same thing for several years. And I was like, oh, I have a skincare routine, and I really didn't want to change it. And she looked at me and said, Annie, it's not working for you. That's why you're here. And I kind of had to laugh because we all get in routines where we do the same thing, but yet we don't really want to change it. It just made me think of today's topic. With anxiety and depression, it can be a hard topic to talk about. I love that Shawn introduces us to some new ideas, some new strategies. I will tell you, I've suffered from anxiety in 2020 and 2021 and used his strategies, and they were really, really helpful for me. So, as we talk today, maybe it's something you've never thought about or used, but I would just invite you to have a curious mind to see if it might be something you'd incorporate. Today's guest is one of my favorite people to listen to. It's Pastor Shawn Johnson. I can't wait for you to hear from him. He runs Red Rocks Church. They have locations in Denver, Colorado, Austin, Texas, Brussels, Belgium, and Guys Behind Bars. He wrote a book called Attacking Anxiety: From Panic and Depressed to Alive and Free. Pastor Shawn has so much great advice and such a powerful story on overcoming anxiety and depression. He gives practical advice that you're not going to want to miss. And I will tell you up front, if you don't have the book, by the end, you're definitely going to want to order it. And I'll link to that in the show notes. I've got a question for you. Who is the person you're being? Are you satisfied? It's okay. This is a judge-free zone, and it's exactly why I started the show. Welcome to Be the Person, a podcast for the brave and the curious who are ready to explore who they are fully created to be. I'm your host, Annie Randall, the adventurous one leading this investigative journey of transformation. By delving into topics and asking unexpected questions, we will discover the keys for unlocking our true potential and being our best selves today. You may be surprised by what you find when you let go of fear in order to discover the answers of becoming the person you were made to be. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. I am super excited to have Shawn Johnson. He is our pastor at Red Rocks Church here with us today, and he has a really amazing story that I'm super excited for him to share with us today. Welcome, Shawn, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've been at Red Rocks for about 4 years now,
Okay.
and I love when you shared your story right when we were coming in. And I would love just to start out with just a little bit about your story. We don't have to go into detail right now, but what do you do today, and how did you get to where you're at?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, what I do today is I'm the pastor of Red Rocks Church. Have been for 19 years, and how I got there is a roller coaster of events. So, how far would you like me to go back?
As maybe from the beginning, I know that church wasn't something that you started out with, that you
Yeah.
were maybe a long ways from church. Can
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
take us back there?
Yeah. Okay. Um, I'll give you the quick cliff notes of kind of the beginning of life because it sort of has affected everything else. My mom she got pregnant with me when she was 17 in high school, and she was a heroin addict. And when the guy who got her pregnant found out, he literally left town, and they'd never heard from him again. And so she was this kind of scared, um, troubled kid with a kid. And at one point, she actually got so bad that She put me in a baby seat and put me on a stranger's porch with a note attached, and then she went and jumped off of a highway bridge, into oncoming traffic to try to take her own life. Um, it didn't work. She just crushed, like, every bone in her, pretty much waist down, I think. But so interesting beginning for sure. So she lived, she ended up, she's basically a kid raising a kid. And she married her drug dealer when I was 2 years old. And dysfunctional and abusive, would be the best way to describe it, to not get too much into detail growing up. And then at 24, I started repeating her habits, somewhat in the drugs. I got into drugs real bad. I was living in Los Angeles, um, was an addict, not like a live on the street, sleep on a street bench addict, but very high functioning, but just doing drugs every day and every night. And got to a point where I wanted to take my own life, and I actually sat down at a table one day to do it. And I had this crazy thought go through my head of, wait a minute, I heard about heaven and hell when I was a little kid. Like, what if that's real? I'm going to go to one of them in like 5 minutes. Um, and so I got kind of scared because of that thought. And so I called the one person in my life that was a Christian other than my mom. And this person kind of talked me off a ledge, so to speak, and then ended up actually taking me to a church. And it was in a church service when I was 24 that I gave my life to God. Still had drugs in my pocket at the time. Um, and eventually, that church was in Rockford, Illinois. Eventually, about 3, 4 weeks later, month later, um, moved from LA to Illinois. And my thought was, I'm just going to kind of be around these church people for like a few months and just kind of get my head on straight, because I'd try to figure this stuff out. And then I'll go back to LA and, keep doing what I was doing. And as God would have it, he had other plans, and I ended up interning to be a pastor at that church, which all my friends were like, "You're doing what?" And became a youth pastor, and then a young adults pastor. And then 19 years ago, me and Jill joined some friends here in Denver and started Red Rocks Church. And that's where I'm at today.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Jeff and
Yeah.
I are excited to be a part of it, and we're thankful for your journey and what you're doing. And like I mentioned before, we've been there about 4 years, and you
Okay.
see the number on this screen of, like, 59,000 people have come to know Jesus, and you can see that, and it doesn't you think, "That's awesome and amazing." It doesn't really connect with me how many people that is, but because my son Zach was one of them, then it really, like, hit home of
Yeah.
just and especially as a mom, like, I had been praying for that for a long time. So it was really cool to see it
That's
happen for us.
that's awesome. Well, we love your whole family.
Yeah. Thank you. Yours too. Um, but you know what? That was one of the things that I was really drawn to Red Rocks for is right when you in 2019,
Mm,
I'll let you explain kind of what happened, but you were coming back and you shared your story and it was really vulnerable.
yeah.
And it was one of the things though, I thought it just took the pressure off to be perfect in
Mm,
church. That I think we all sometimes,
yeah.
I face that sometimes. And
Yeah.
so I love that. Can you share a little bit about 2019 and what that looked like?
Yeah. So I had been dealing with anxiety and depression for years, probably 10 years. Um, and kind of told people, kind of didn't. I would tell people as much as they needed to know.
Yeah,
Um, you know, um, Especially if I would have like a panic attack, which I would, not all the time, but occasionally. And I would be like, yeah, I have some, anxiety and had a panic attack and, feeling a little depressed today. Or, yeah, I would just kind of, but I would never really want to tell people how bad it was internally. And for me, as the church was growing, my anxiety was just getting worse and worse and worse, mostly because I wasn't telling anybody. And I just kind of thought, as a pastor, like, I should be better than that. I shouldn't have anxiety and depression. And so I was really embarrassed. And then I think also I thought, well, if I tell people how screwed up I feel in my own mind, like, who would want to go to this church? Like, I'll wreck the church if I tell everybody how bad I really feel. So in my mind, I sort of turned it into a positive that I was keeping it to myself because I was doing it for the betterment of the people I loved. They wouldn't have to deal with my mess. People in the church wouldn't have to deal with my mess. So I just kind of was like, I'll just, process all that myself in my head. And in 2019, I just couldn't anymore. It kind of literally boiled over. I started having panic attacks pretty much every day, out of control. Um, in fact, one day when it kind of all came to a head, I was driving down C470 and just started having a panic attack in my truck. And I called my wife and I was just like, babe, please pray for me. Like, I'm losing it. And I pulled my car over to the side of the road and I just started like walking up and down the side of that little foothills over there and just kind of falling apart, yelling at God. Why won't you help me? I need a miracle. I quit, like all of it. And so that started a journey that, I just didn't see coming, where I kinda had to tell more people how bad it was getting. And so, the first thing we did is I went to see I have 2 people that I call pastor, and one of them lives in Alabama, and I went and saw him, and, me and Jill actually stayed there for 2 weeks, and he helped me with a lot of seeing it in a lot of different ways, but also one of the things was he's like, "Man, you need some childhood trauma, like therapy, counseling. You got a lot of stuff going on that you've never dealt with." Um, and then through another friend, we heard of a place and went to this place. And I was supposed to go for 4 weeks. It was like it's an inpatient. You check yourself in for 4 weeks. And I think I was so messed up. They every week after four, they were like, "Bro, you can't go home yet." Ended up staying there 7 weeks, which was challenging, but ended up being pretty life changing. My family got to visit a handful of times, and so then I came back and just took a few months off work. Our team was like, "You just take a few months off work and like just try to you know gather yourself." And so then about the time that you're referring to, right at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I was going to come back and I was trying to figure out what to tell the church because my I've always felt like the best thing I have to offer as a pastor is, vulnerability and just honesty, and so I've always been like the church knew I had anxiety and depression because I told them. I just hadn't told them how bad, and so I was trying to figure out, like, what do I tell the church when I come back? And I had some people say, "Well, be careful how much you share because you don't want them to lose faith in you." And I was like, "Man, that sucks because I don't want to keep any more secrets. Like, I don't know what to do." And I talked to one other pastor and he was like, "No, dude." He's like, "You tell them everything." And he actually said something that was really deep. He said, "You know what people in your church want to know?" He said, "They want to know your house sucks too sometimes." And
Yeah.
I thought, man, you're so right. And so, yeah, so about the time you guys were starting to come to the church is when I was just coming back. And then I just told the church everything. All the panic attacks, the suicidal thoughts, like just all of it. And I thought, here goes the church. Like, no one's going to want to come here because I'm about to tell everyone how screwed up I am. Um, and then I just kind of finished it with, I'm better and healthier and stronger than I was, but definitely still on a journey. And I'm broken like all of us. But if you'll have me, I'll be your pastor. I'll just have to do it slightly broken. And I kind of thought the church would start to shrink and people would start to leave. And to my surprise, the opposite happened. It was kind of like what you said. I think people were, and I just didn't see it coming, but I think people were sort of drawn in because it was like, well, if he can admit he's screwed up, then I guess I can admit I'm screwed up. And I just didn't see that coming. I thought it would have the opposite effect. And so, yeah, so that's about the time you guys started coming.
Yeah. And it really was that of maybe you just wanna know honestly, I think we're all pretty screwed up of just
Yes,
we're
I
broken
agree.
people that I
Yes.
know how much probably me and several other people dealing with the anxiety through the pandemic,
Yeah.
how much that message would be important and the book that you would write would have such an impact.
Yeah, and I never saw that coming either, but yeah, I agree. The funny thing about the pandemic for my story and when it happened was, what did it started around April maybe 2020 or May or March or somewhere in
March.
there? March,
Yep.
and, so I come back right at the beginning of 2020, and my counselors are like, "Okay, ease back into work. Don't make any major changes. Don't do anything that's stressful. Keep everything the same." And COVID came. And
Yeah.
so it was like, "Oh, that's hilarious because nothing's the same now."
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm sure it was an extremely stressful time. I know it was to run a business, and I'm sure to run a church was
100%. Because like you guys, you depend on the building for your business,
yeah.
and we depend on our buildings to do church, and when they shut down the churches, we were because we have many locations, we're like, like, "What do we do? I think we're done." I mean, it's crazy, and then God just comes in and does things that you could never figure out on your own. And now we all have these stories looking back of just kind of testimonies of how God took care of us and things that he wants us to continue to be a part of and all that stuff.
Yeah. For sure it was, because we named our first, studio Circle 19, and it
Okay.
was, based on the book Mark Batterson of The Circle Maker.
Circle maker. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the verse is Joshua 1:9, "Be strong and courageous,"
Ah, so cool.
because we circled that studio in prayer, and I really felt like it was a God dream that he put on our heart. Because I didn't really wanna own a gym, but I really wanted to create this community of people.
Yeah.
And so I remember just sitting at our kitchen table when we had to close down our studios during that time. And I just sat because I had to go lead a leadership meeting and close everything down. And I just sat there and cried because I was like, I don't even know if I can do this. And I opened to that verse, and the verse that pops off the page was Joshua 1:5, that I will not forsake you. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, what a like that was my verse through COVID. And
That's
it was just so cool, like to see God show up in that way.
Yep. Yep. That's awesome. I love that name, Circle 19. That's cool.
Yeah. So it has special meaning to us.
Heck yeah.
Um, but you wrote the book. I have it. It has a lot of underlines. It honestly looks like somebody drove over it because I've given it away a lot and I've read it a lot. And I think it really helped a lot of people and it helps me. So you guys, if you don't have this book, you need to get the book and Attacking Anxiety. But one of the things that I love that you talk about in there is really playing offense versus defense. And I
Yeah.
never thought of it that way. And I was like, you know what? I don't think most people do think of mental health that way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had never thought of it that way either. I think what we feel is this is just kind of my lot in life. It's what I've been dealt, and I have to deal with it. And it'll probably never get better. Of course, I'll pray and hope and try to do things, but it'll probably never get much better. I'll always be like this. That's just who I am. And at least that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And so I told you I went to see one of my pastors when I was having all those panic attacks, like daily, multiple times a day, really. And I got to Alabama where he lives, and we were sitting in his office, and I was telling him like my whole sob story and everything that's going wrong and how I feel and all my emotions and the panic attacks and everything. And he's a pastor, so I'm thinking he's probably going to come over to this side of the table and give me a little hug, pastoral thing. Not at all. He, which is good. It's not what I needed. I needed what he told me. He looked me right in the eyes and he said, "Hey, that's tough, and it'll get tougher." And so he said, "But Shawn, you're a fighter, and it's time to stop taking this and feeling sorry for yourself and blaming yourself, and it's time to start fighting back." He's like, "You're not fighting against just anxiety. There's a real enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy the peace, hope, and joy that God wants you to have. And so you're not just in a physical battle, you're in a spiritual battle also. And it is time to stop just taking it and time to start fighting." And I'd never seen it that way. Um, and I started to get this like almost like a little bit of like a glimmer of hope in my soul. Like, you mean I can actually do something? I don't have to just live with this. And of course, the very next thought was, what now? But just that idea of you don't have to just sit back and play defense. You can actually go get this thing. And when I started, the title came from as I was studying just really stuff for myself. Um, I noticed this theme often throughout the Bible where God says, I have something for you, but then he says, now you have to go fight and take hold of it. For instance, um, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, God takes them through the desert or wilderness, depending on which translation you're reading, for 40 years, and then they go to the promised land. Well, he says to Joshua, Joshua 1:9, that same passage that you were just talking about, that he telling Joshua not to be afraid was because he was about to cross the Jordan River and start to go into the promised land and or head that direction. And it's interesting because he says, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And it's almost like this amazing, like, we got this promise.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, wait a minute. If God already said, he actually told Joshua in that same like little section, I'm going to give you every place where you put your foot. Every place you put your foot, I'm going to give you. So if God's going with him and he gets every place he puts his foot and he's promised this land, I'm like, why would God need to tell him not to be afraid? And the answer is because they were going to have to go fight 31 battles to take hold of the promised land. They just didn't know it yet. So here it is. God says, I have something for you. Now you go fight and take hold of it because I put a fighter spirit inside of you. I haven't given you a spirit of fear, but power, love, and a sound mind. So, Paul tells Timothy, fight the good fight of faith. He says, Timothy, God's got plans for you, and I'm handing you the baton, and now you're going to go do ministry, but it is a fight. So you're going to have to go fight to take hold of the life that God has in store for you. And so that was really where the title came from, attacking anxiety. It's like, no, let's go on the offense. My publishers hated it. They were like, no, this, it's too aggressive. It's gonna put people off, especially women. And I was like, guys, and they wanted me to go the opposite route, which was like titles like, it shouldn't be this way. Or, you know what I mean? Titles that were almost on the defense. And I was like, no, you're missing the whole point. I know it's aggressive. That's the whole point. You have to be aggressive if you want to see something change. You got to go do something you haven't done before. And so I finally, after a lot of arguing, convinced them to let me call it attacking anxiety, because the whole theme is let's go on the offense and use the spiritual weapons that God has given us to start battling against not just anxiety, but the enemy.
Yeah. Because I think you're right that God has given us those promises, and they're the promises that we want to rest on, but yet oftentimes they come with a price and a battle that we have to pay because Satan has a totally different plan for our lives.
Yep.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you stuck with it and kept the title. It's
Yes,
exciting.
a friend of mine, pastor named Pastor Craig Groeschel, I kept calling him and I'd be like, they don't like the title. And he kept telling me, no, that is the title. You tell them that has to be the title. And so, yeah, it was fun, but I won. I won that argument. They won most of the arguments, but I won that one.
That's good. Well, you start out with 3 things that you think everybody should know that is dealing with anxiety and depression, and I thought they were so powerful because it can be a really lonely place.
Mhm.
Can you share those 3 things?
Yeah, yeah. What happened is, in fact, the service that you probably were referring to, where I told the whole church my whole story and how bad it was, I was upstairs at our Littleton campus, and a family walked up to me. Well, it was I don't know if it was the whole family, but it was a mom, a dad, and a son, and they were kind of in tears. And the mom said to me, "Our son really struggles with anxiety. Um, what's one thing you would tell him?" And I had not had this planned. It just literally, I feel like God just gave me this little 3 phrases, and I just looked at him and I said, here's what I think God would want you to know right now. You're not crazy. You're not alone, and this will end.
Yeah.
And because, when you're in the middle of anxiety and depression, you feel crazy. You feel like I must be insane and no one's going to understand. It's part of what makes us want to keep it to ourselves. Nobody's going to understand how bad this really hurts. No one's going to understand how hard this really is. I think I'm going crazy. When I was on the side of the road that day having that panic attack, I was like, I think I've just lost my mind. Like I'm crazy. And you're not crazy. You just have anxiety or you have depression that you're dealing with. Um, and you're not alone. And the statistics are actually crazy. And obviously I did a lot of studying on that stuff for the book, but um, right now, I think the statistic, like, what's I can't think of it. For the country, it's like the main, they say all the drugs are okay for medicine and
Oh, the FDA. Is that it?
well, that's probably it too.
Yes.
Dang it. Anyways, I'll think of it before this thing's over. It'll pop in my head. Anyways, they're sort of the kind of the stat holder for the country in a lot of areas. And they say right now on their website, 1 out of every 2 Americans will deal with anxiety in their lifetime, which means almost every single one of us either has dealt with it, will deal with it, or loves somebody who does or will. Like it's just everywhere. And especially in the church, it was so unheard of for anyone to admit having it because it almost felt like an indictment on your faith, right? Because when we talk about our faith in Jesus, we oftentimes use verses of the Bible like Romans 15:13 that talk about peace and hope and joy. And we go, well, I don't have peace. I have anxiety. And I don't have joy. I feel depressed. So I must not be a good Christian. I must not have good faith. Maybe I'm a hypocrite. Like that's all the things I was thinking. Um, and so I think in the church, even more than anywhere else, we were just scared to death to admit that we were dealing with this stuff. So anyways, yeah, I just told him you're not crazy. Um, you, if you were crazy, you would need to be in a facility and people would need to take care of you. You're not crazy. You know your name, you know where you live. You're very smart. You got a lot going on in life. You're just dealing with anxiety and you're not alone. And this will end. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. There's things that God tells us in his word that we can go do to begin battling for our own freedom from this stuff. And so that's why those 3 phrases were so important to me.
Yeah. And I think super powerful because when you're in it, you feel all of those things alone,
100%.
weak, and it's always going to be there.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. There's so much shame, whether in the church or not. I think it's getting better. People are starting to talk about, like mental health.
Mhm.
But man, I think there is a lot of shame around that. And I think Satan trying to say, keep it quiet, keep it a secret. If you deal with this alone, don't tell anybody.
Yep. The
Yeah.
it That's one of the things I probably there were a few things in counseling that were like big ticket items that I had to deal with, and shame was one of them. I was so, mad at myself for not being better, and it's all my fault. And if I was stronger and better and more spiritual like I should be, this wouldn't be happening. And shame, you know, and God just doesn't do shame. And so when we're feeling shameful, um, it's always truly an indication that Satan's whispering lies in our ear. Um, you know, God has this great way of letting us know, hey, what you did was wrong. And but shame says you are wrong. And that's totally different than, what you did is wrong. So I'm trying to help you correct that because I want you to have a better life. That's how God works. Satan works like this. You are wrong and you are hopeless. And that's how I felt. Yeah.
What would you say to some people? Because I'm thinking there's a lot of people listening to right now that
Mhm,
they're thinking, if I was only stronger, I
mhm,
shouldn't be dealing with this.
mhm.
All of that. Like if they're hearing those lies, what would you tell them?
I would say that every single person is broken. We're all broken differently. It's like a baseball. I'm sitting in my office. If a baseball went through one of my windows right now, there'd be a bazillion pieces of broken glass all over the floor. They're all broken. They're all broken in different shapes. They're just all broken differently. And that's how we are. And for some reason, we've allowed this lie to creep into our minds that if it's a mental struggle, like a mental illness struggle, then it's just worse than dealing with other things. And it's not, it's just different. And so you're not broken. beyond repair. You're not broken in a shameful way. You're just like every single human broken. And so I think the first thing is, I had to do that. I had to realize, because, for me in my mind, it was like, well, I can't be a pastor anymore. Now that I've told everyone how bad it is, I can't be a pastor because I'm broken. And it was really interesting. I was talking to my counselor the week before I came back to the church. And I told him, I said, hey, I don't think I can go back. And he's like, why not? And I said, well, because I'm not fixed yet. And I knew I was better and stronger and healthier, but I wasn't fixed yet. And he goes, hey, Shawn, he goes, whose church is it? And this holds true for every single calling for every single one of us, right? Like, whose plan is it that you do what you're about to do with your God's, right? But for me, it's running a church. He said, okay. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, if God could choose between two people to run Red Rocks Church, let's say there's this one guy who is perfect. I mean, has no problems, no issues. He's amazing. In fact, he's so good, he doesn't need to rely on God for anything. Or what if he had a person that's so broken that they know the only way possible for me to walk in this calling is to lean on God the whole time? Which one do you think he'd want running the church? And it was funny because I went, I think he'd want the broken one. And he's like, exactly. And then he said something so profound, and we know it, but we don't let it apply to ourselves. He said, God only uses broken people because what other kinds are there?
So true.
You know what I mean? So we disqualify ourselves from things we think God might be putting in front of us because we're like, I'm too broken. And it's like, no, he only uses broken people because that's
Yeah.
all of us.
And
So
I
if someone's really struggling right now, I would just say, just put the shame aside. The best thing I did was go tell somebody who would push me closer to God the truth about how bad it really was and not hold anything back. Um,
Yeah.
I had been holding back like kind of my last 10, 15% from everybody and even my wife. And once I shared everything, like the deep, dark, here's what I think about when you all go to sleep and nobody knows, like the bad stuff. That was the beginning of freedom. The beginning of freedom was to stop hiding parts of it that only I'm dealing with, because it feels admirable, but I mean, God's word couldn't be more clear that, like, he even says, pity the fool who has no one to help him up when he falls. He's like, two are just better than one. Three's even better. Like, we were meant to do this life with people. And the best thing I ever did was go share how bad my anxiety was with some trusted people that I knew would push me closer to God and not just like get rid of me because of it.
Yeah. I love that, and I think we're all tempted to withhold the last 10% because it's like the dark stuff that we don't wanna share with anybody. I know that was the case, like, even in our marriage for Jeff and I of, like, we had been married 20 years, but there was still probably a holdback, and it was finally, like, in counseling that we were like, "Wait a minute, why are we holding back with each other?" But I think we do that in relationships we really care about, and
Um,
of those secrets that we were like, "Oh, if they know, are they gonna love me?" And I think
that's the thought right there, isn't it? I
yeah,
love this person so much. I can't imagine doing life without him. I can't risk them knowing how screwed up I am and not wanting me anymore in their life.
yeah,
And that's the fear. And the irony of that is, after my wife found out everything and how broken I was, that's when we started actually getting closer than we ever been before. Because
mhm,
what I didn't realize is, you can't be fully loved if you're not fully known. And we know that, but we still don't like to be fully known. I want to keep some of it to myself because it embarrasses me, or I'm afraid you might leave or judge me or whatever the case. Once I was able to be fully known and then she still loved me, I'd never felt more loved by her in our whole life. And at that time, we'd been married about 20 years. And so, yeah, it's like I kind of kept this wall up between us. And it sort of was like, we're only going to be able to get so close because there's just parts of me I'm not going to let you know about.
yeah,
Um, but when I finally told her everything, it was like, well, now we can actually be all the way close because you know
mm,
me.
yeah,
And that's really freeing. And, I thought I was so scared to tell the church and so scared to tell my friends. What I didn't understand was freedom is on the other side of sharing that stuff with people that you care about, because you don't have to hide it anymore. And it takes a lot of energy to hide that stuff. Even when it's not like I'm hiding anything illegal. I'm not hiding anything immoral. I'm just hiding some of my defects because I'm afraid you won't like me. But it takes a lot of energy to hide those things, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. When you can just show up and be real and be free with people, there is 100% freedom in that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I wanna get super tactical because I think
Okay.
some people might be thinking, "Okay, I want that. I wanna be free. You're telling me I can play offense. Like, how? How do I do it?" So I know that your pastor gave you some advice and
Mhm.
you did some things, when you were in Alabama, and can we start there? Can you give just a little bit of tactical, like, what would you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. And I will, but I would also say in our little few minutes together, I couldn't clearly really thoroughly explain much, and so, honestly, that's why I wrote the book. In fact, I was scared to death to write it because I'm like, "And I'm this is new, like, I just went through all this." And some friends and pastors were just like, "That's the best time to write because you can be real about your feelings and you won't have forgotten what they feel like." And so, I would say, honestly, get the book. Not because I'm trying to get someone in to read my book. I get no, I'm just not that guy. I don't care about that. But I wrote it because I really feel like there are some tactical things, and just having gone through them, I want other people to sort of get that information. I'll give you the start. So the beginning, the first one was my pastor looked at me and he's like, "You're in a spiritual battle. So why aren't you spiritually battling?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, um, "It's time to go to war. Like the enemy is trying to steal, kill, and destroy your life, your career, your calling, your family. Um, it's time to fight back." And here I am, a pastor, and I'm going, "Yes, amen." And then my next thought was, "How? I don't even know what to do." And he's like, "Well, I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna pray and we're gonna worship." I'm like, "That's it?" I was hoping for something way deeper than that. Like, and he's like, "Listen, um, if we believe what we talk about, the Bible all throughout it talks about there's power in prayer. And the Bible says that he inhabits the praises of his people. Like there's a unique sense of his presence when you're in worship. And then there's a whole bunch of verses that talk about what happens in his presence. And I list them out in the book, but there's things like the Bible promises us in God's presence there is peace. In his presence there is joy. In his presence there is strength. In his presence there is confidence. Like, and so he's like, we're going to actually do what the Bible says we have access to and authority to do. And so he goes, here's the rules. He goes, you're going to take a playlist, you take some music. He gave us a little Bluetooth speaker, and we were going to be there for 2 weeks. And he's like, they have a chapel, and one of the rooms is where like all the grooms and groomsmen would get ready for a wedding. He's like, no one's using that room. So for 2 weeks, he's like, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go in that room for 30 minutes with your wife. You can put on worship music because the Bible says he inhabits the praises of his people. So we're going to take him up on that because we need his presence in a unique and a special way. And you're going to pray together out loud every day for 30 minutes. And my wife was so excited about those marching orders. I was not. I don't like praying out loud where people hear me. She sounds super spiritual when she prays. I sound like a caveman. Um, so, anyways, we did. And so, and I'll be honest, it was really hard. It was really messy. The first 3 days, I'm not sure I did much more but sit on a couch and cry, and Jill would pray. Um, by the end of it, like about day 3 or 4, I started singing along with the songs. I remember like the first few days I would pray, but my only prayer was God help me. That's all I knew to say, or Jesus help me, Jesus help me. Um, by the end of 2 weeks, I'm walking around the room with my wife, worshiping, praying out loud, claiming victory through worship songs, through verses. And in a 2 week time period of doing that one thing, I stopped having daily panic attacks. It was crazy. And it was just like, and that's just one of the many things that God says you can do. Um, and what I learned it for me is, and you see it so many times, you see it with the nation of Israel in the desert in their very first battle. Um, they are told to, it's a battle of Jericho, a bunch of people, even if you haven't heard much about the Bible or church, you maybe have heard of that when it was the first battle that they had to fight in to go take hold of the promised land. God tells them before they go into battle to start um, sounding all of the instruments that normally would often be used for worship and to declare victory. And he said, I want you to do that now before you even go into the battle. And what I learned is sometimes you worship because you've had a victory. Sometimes you worship until you see one. And that worship became one of the weapons that my pastor walked me through, and I learned a lot through. And I have some stories where became very practical and real in my life that in that particular part of the book. But that was like one of them, and it was like there's really things that I can actually go do. Now there were some things I had to stop doing as well, and I talk about those. But there were some things I had to do. There's some things I had to stop doing. Um, but through that process, I realized I don't have to sit back and take this. I can actually go attack anxiety and expect to experience more peace, joy, and hope that God said I get through the relationship I have with his son Jesus. And so that's kind of, yeah, that's one.
Yeah. That was super helpful for me personally, and I know you put your playlist it used to be on Spotify, I don't know if is it still
I think
there?
it still is. I've never taken it down, but maybe someone on our team did. But it used to be on Spotify. To my knowledge, it's still there, but I don't know that 100%. I haven't looked in a while. But it was just, I think it was called Attacking Anxiety Playlist, I think.
Yeah, I'll link to it if it is in the show notes because I used it in, again, 2020 when we had to shut down our studios. uh, Anxiety was definitely there and it stayed. What was crazy was like, okay, we opened the studios back up. Everything was going fine, but that anxiety didn't go away, and I had my own playlist based on some of yours, and I would use that same strategy. I have a bike in my basement, and sometimes of just listening to that, and I'm a person that needs to move
Yeah.
too, of just and declaring those promises, and I love how you list those out in the book. It's one of my favorite parts about the book.
Mm.
Just here are all the things that God promises and where he promises those at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's huge. It's one of the things that, helped me so much was in the middle of struggle to one of the things that's very tactical, as you put it, is remembering what God's brought you through on purpose, because we tend to forget.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was helping me so much get through anxiety was I had to start writing down all of the things that God has brought me through, and then all the things that He's promised me. And then when I look at those things in light of the things I'm struggling with, the things I'm struggling with start to feel less and less, and I start to rely more and more on his promises and what he's already brought me through. And then I just keep reminding myself, like, look at this list. Look at all the things he's brought me through. If he could get me through that, he can get me through this. And that's really helpful.
Yeah. I think journaling and just writing, like you said, some of those things is so helpful and good because our mind just forgets.
Mhm.
We're in it right now and it's the worst thing ever. And that's all we think about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Well, any advice? I want to be respectful of your time and we'll wrap up here
Sure.
soon. But any advice that you would have right now? I know that we've talked a lot about it. We've talked about some things they can do. I would
Mhm.
definitely, again, recommend the book because it's so, so helpful. But if we have somebody who's just listening today and
Mhm.
they're in it of just either anxiety, depression, or both,
Mhm.
um, what would you say to them right now as we wrap up?
I would say, don't you dare give up. Um, God has a plan for your life, and he does things in your life that will blow you away if you give him the chance. And it's time to start fighting back. And I think if you're not a part of a local church, I think you need to get in one and get in a group and start to surround yourself with some believers. Um, and if you don't already have those people in your life, especially, but um, it's not gonna stay this way, but you're gonna start to experience some freedom when you go tell somebody, and then get help, and ask the people that you love. There's so much wisdom in godly counsel when you get around people who their goal is to get closer to Jesus, and you talk to them and go, you know me, like, what do you think are some of the things I really need help with? um my pastor knew me. He's like, you need help with dealing with what you've been through, because you and he's like, you've been through some stuff and you've never processed it, and it can't be good for you. There's a very interesting book called The Body Keeps Score, and it talks about trauma in life and how it stays with you and actually affects your body and your mentality, your physical aspects of your body when you have undealt with trauma in your life. And I was definitely feeling some effects of that. So, like, I needed to share what I was going through. I needed to get counseling. I just did. Um, one of the sounds so off the wall. One of the things I spent a ton of time working through in counseling was forgiveness. Um, I needed to forgive some people. I was holding on to a lot of bitterness and hurt, and that just keeps stirring things up and made anxiety worse. And so, it's a process. It's not an overnight thing, but it starts with sharing it with somebody else, spending time with God, spending time with people who will push you closer to God, trying to get some practical help through counsel. Um, and that's where I would start.
Yeah.
And honestly, sometimes it's medical. There's nothing wrong with there's this huge stigma, I feel like sometimes, especially in the church, of like, well, I would never want to take like anti-anxiety medication. And you may not need that. But what I've learned just from being in it and going through it is like, there are just certain ways that the chemical makeups of the and wirings, maybe from birth, maybe from things that have happened along the course of life. But our brain's just a habit forming machine, and it loves to repeat. And so for me, they actually told me when I was in counseling, they're like, "We're going to put you on some medicine that we really feel like is going to help you, because you have some chemical imbalances just naturally." And they're like, "You may not have to take this for the rest of your life. It might be you take this for a couple of years. Give your brain a couple of years of um, creating some new highways in there that say, when I feel this, I can react differently." And but so, like, I would see a doctor, I would see a counselor, I would get around Christian friends, I would share how bad it is, and I would start spending some time with God, and I would get in church as much as possible. Like, I think those are a bunch of the things I would go, like, give God a chance to get involved. And you start doing all those things, you start giving him a chance, and he'll use people to help you. He'll use a counselor, he'll use a friend, he'll use a spouse, he'll use a pastor's message, he'll use a friend's encouragement at a small group or in the lobby of a church. Like, just get around people and places where he's the focus, and he'll use all kinds of things to sort of help you in different ways.
Yeah. I love that, to give God a chance, because sometimes I know that we have some people that are Christians that are listening to it too, and they're
Yeah.
thinking, "I don't even know what that means." But I
Yeah.
think to just say, "Okay, God, I'd love you to show up," and be open to how that looks, because I'm a big believer that God does show up in different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. It's funny. It's not funny. Interesting. The reason I ended up feeling suicidal at 24 is because I started having panic attacks for the first time in my life, and I didn't know what they were. And they got so bad, I wanted to end my life. And when I went to a church and gave my life to Jesus, like, it changed everything. And that was part of it. That got so much better for so many years. And then I think he gracefully let me go through what I went through in 2019 so I could finally deal with some things that I needed to deal with and process, so that I could just go on and live the rest of my life in a freer fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good. What is the best way? I know a lot of people are listening thinking, "Okay, I wanna connect, follow, link up with him. How do I do that?" What's the best way?
Well, if you are in Denver or anywhere near, or Austin, Texas, or Brussels, Belgium, we have churches in all those cities. We have four in Denver, at pretty kind of on each side of town. Excuse me. So we would love to see you at church. Like, that's a great way. Um, if you're not, redrockschurch.com, or just YouTube in just Red Rocks Church. We put every message we do on there. We talk about this kind of stuff often. Like our whole goal with the church is to be real and raw and honest and talk about things that people are dealing with. And so, and then I try my best to also put encouraging bits of information and clips on my Instagram. And so I don't even know, Shawn Johnson RRC, I think. But people who do Instagram will know how to find it, whatever, however that works. I'm not very good with that stuff. Actually, the truth is our creative team puts some really good stuff on my Instagram account. That's what happens. So I would say those would be, church, online, IG. That's three that I think would be pretty good.
Awesome.
And
And I'll
the book is
yeah,
really, again, it's everything I know to say to somebody who's struggling with anxiety or depression. Like that's what it is. So
absolutely.
yeah.
And this is coming out the week, right, of Easter, which is gonna be awesome. So if you're hearing this the week it comes out, Easter is the next week, and the Red Rocks has so many different services, Saturday night and all day Sunday. It's
Yep.
just the perfect opportunity to give Red Rocks a try.
Yep. If you're listening and haven't been to church forever or think you would have liked church or whatever, aren't a part of a church, man, I would love for you to come hang out with us this weekend. I think you'll have more fun than you think, and you might just be surprised what God might do in your life. Yeah, so please, man, come hang out with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know that you, one, are super busy, and two, you're just so vulnerable and real and just share from a place that I think people really, really relate to. So I appreciate you being on here so
Oh,
much.
thank you so much. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you guys for tuning in to Be the Person podcast. If somebody you would know would benefit from hearing this, please share it with them so we can help get the word out. Thank you so much.